as this individual problem, like, oh, you just need to be more resilient or manage your time better.
Right.
But what really jumped out at me in these sources is the emphasis on the organizational side of things.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just about me needing to take another vacation.
Well, vacations definitely help.
Okay.
But the research paper really digs into this whole concept of what they call organizational burnout.
Okay.
So think of it like this. Imagine a plant that's constantly being exposed to these harsh conditions, not enough light, maybe too much water, bad soil.
All right.
And eventually it's going to wither, right?
Yeah, of course.
Well, our work environments can be a little bit like that too.
Okay.
If we're constantly under stress and we feel unsupported or we just lack control over the work that we do,
Yeah.
we're going to start to show those signs of wear and tear. And that's what organizational burnout really is.
Okay.
It's chronic, so it's ongoing, physical and emotional exhaustion, and it comes from just this prolonged workplace stress.
That plant analogy really does kind of paint a picture.
Right.
And I think, honestly, a lot of people can relate to that feeling of being kind of withered by their job.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt that way?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think most of us have probably experienced at least some degree of burnout at some point.
At some point, right?
In our careers.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to kind of understand how it progresses.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this infographic now, and it really lays out these 6 stages of burnout.
Okay.
And it's almost like this roadmap
Yeah.
from that initial excitement of a new job to,
Yeah.
well, complete meltdown.
Yeah, it's Maslach's 6 stages of burnout.
Okay.
It's this classic model, really helpful for recognizing where you might be on that spectrum.
Okay, let's walk through these.
Okay.
Stage 1 is called the honeymoon phase,
Yeah.
which sounds pretty idyllic.
Yeah.
Lots of energy, lots of commitment, lots of creativity. I mean, who wouldn't want to stay there forever?
It is the fun part. You're excited about the work. You're full of ideas.
Yeah.
You're probably putting in extra hours without even thinking about it. But, just like any honeymoon, it does eventually come to an end.
Right. Right.
Honeymoon's over.
And that's where stage 2 comes in. The onset of stress. And I'm seeing here in the infographic that you might start experiencing some fatigue, maybe some trouble sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
And you might not be quite as enthusiastic as you were in the beginning.
Exactly. Those high expectations that you had might be bumping up against, the reality of deadlines, demanding clients, or just the everyday grind.
Yeah.
And this is a really important stage to pay attention to, because if you ignore those early warning signs, things can start to get a little bit out of control.
And that leads us to stage 3, chronic stress. Now we're really starting to see in the infographic that your symptoms are starting to get worse. You're likely feeling more irritable. You're more cynical.
And that's where those physical symptoms can really start to show up too.
Yeah.
Headaches, back pain, maybe some digestive issues, even a weakened immune system.
Yeah.
Your body is trying to tell you that something's got to give.
Okay, so far not great.
Yeah.
But it sounds like we can still manage this.
Yeah.
Stage 4, however, sounds a bit more ominous.
Okay.
It's called brownout.
Ah, yes, the brownout.
So what happens here?
This is where people really start to withdraw.
Okay.
You might isolate yourself from your colleagues. You become more negative.
Yeah.
You might be really critical and cynical, and you might procrastinate on important tasks. So there's a real shift in your attitude and behavior.
And if you don't address it at that point,
Yeah.
we move into stage 5. Depersonalization. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier, and honestly, it sounds kind of scary.
Yeah.
What does this actually look like in a work setting?
It can be subtle at first, but, imagine feeling emotionally numb
Okay.
when you're dealing with your colleagues or your clients. You might feel like you're just going through the motions, like
Yeah.
you're watching yourself from outside your body.
Wow.
And that lack of empathy and emotional connection can really impact your work and your relationships.
That's intense.
Yeah.
And then finally we reach stage 6, crisis.
Yeah.
And the infographic warns of serious emotional and physical problems. Anxiety, chronic fatigue, even thoughts of quitting your job altogether.
This is full-blown burnout. And it can be incredibly debilitating. Your physical and mental health are really compromised at this point, and it can have this ripple effect on every single area of your life.
Yeah.
So it's really crucial to try to address burnout before it reaches this point.
Okay, so we have this clear picture of how burnout unfolds.
Right.
But what are those main drivers? What's really pushing people down this path in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that the research paper digs into in detail. They highlight 6 key causes.
Okay.
And I think it's really interesting how they're all kind of interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
You can almost see how one issue feeds into the next, creating this like perfect storm for burnout.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these 6 causes.
Well, the first one is workload, which, might seem pretty obvious
Yeah.
when you're constantly overloaded with tasks and deadlines.
Right.
It's natural to feel super overwhelmed and stressed.
Right.
But it's not just about the quantity of work.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
also about the intensity and the pressure that comes with it.
I can see how that feeling of constantly being pressured to do more with less could really take a toll.
Absolutely. And that ties in directly to the second cause, control, or
Okay.
rather the lack of control.
Okay.
So when you feel like you have no say in what you do, how you do it, or when you do it,
Right.
it can lead to these feelings of helplessness and frustration, which are huge contributors to burnout.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're just a cog in the machine with no agency over your own work,
Yeah,
it's easy to feel disillusioned.
exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting. That lack of control can often breed a toxic work culture,
Uh-huh.
which is the third cause on the list.
Wow.
So when people feel powerless,
Mm.
they might resort to things like unhealthy competition, gossip, negativity,
Right.
and it creates this like vicious cycle that fuels burnout.
So it becomes this kind of breeding ground for negativity and stress.
Precisely. And then you add in things like lack of reward.
Okay.
So you feel like your hard work goes unnoticed or unappreciated. And then unclear expectations, which can lead to confusion and anxiety. And you've got a recipe for disaster.
And I imagine that lack of community, that feeling of isolation and lack of support from colleagues,
Yeah,
that can make things even worse.
absolutely. It's like trying to climb a mountain without any ropes or fellow climbers.
Right.
You might be able to make some progress on your own, but it's going to be so much harder and a lot more dangerous
Yeah.
without that sense of connection and support.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
So we've got these 6 kind of interconnected causes,
Mm,
each one contributing to that overall sense of, overwhelm and depletion.
right.
But how do we actually KNO
Yeah.
if we're experiencing burnout?
Yeah.
What are the red flags? What should we be looking out for?
The research paper breaks down those most common symptoms of burnout.
Okay.
There are 6 of them, and they can manifest both physically and emotionally.
Okay, I have a feeling this is where it gets really relatable for a lot of our listeners.
Definitely. And you know what? I think this deserves its own dedicated conversation. So let's save that for after a quick break.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so we've covered those stages of burnout. We talked about those 6 key causes that can really set it in motion.
Right.
Now let's get into those red flags, those symptoms that tell us we might be headed for trouble.
Yeah.
What should we be looking out for?
Well, the research paper outlines 6 common symptoms of burnout.
Okay.
And it's interesting how they sort of mirror those 6 stages that we just discussed. It's like a checklist
Okay.
for where you might be on that burnout spectrum.
Okay, I'm ready for the checklist. Hit me with symptom number 1.
Okay, so the first one, and this is probably the most obvious, is exhaustion.
Okay.
But remember, this isn't just your everyday, I need a nap, kind of tired.
Right.
This is a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that doesn't go away, even after a good night's sleep or a relaxing weekend.
Yeah, I know that feeling. It's like you said, bone weary, like you're running on fumes no matter how much you rest.
Exactly. And that exhaustion can manifest both physically and emotionally.
Okay.
You might feel drained, sluggish, just worn out,
Yeah.
both physically and mentally.
And I imagine that can really impact your ability to focus and get things done.
Absolutely. And that leads us to the second symptom, reduced performance.
Okay.
And it's that feeling of being stuck in a rut, like you're just going through the motions. And your work quality is suffering because of it.
Yeah, it's like a vicious cycle, right?
Totally.
The less energy you have, the harder it is to perform well,
Yeah,
which can lead to more stress and even more burnout.
exactly. And it's not just about the quantity of work that you're producing. It's also about the quality. So you might find yourself making more mistakes, missing deadlines, or just generally feeling less engaged with your work.
And I'm guessing that lack of engagement can also lead to feeling more cynical and negative about your job or even your coworkers.
Absolutely. And that's actually the third symptom on the list.
Okay.
Cynicism and detachment. So you might start to feel emotionally distant from your work and from the people around you.
Right.
You might even start to develop this really negative or critical outlook.
It's like you're putting up an emotional wall to protect yourself,
Yeah.
but it ends up isolating you even further.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that emotional detachment can be really subtle at first.
Okay.
It might start with feeling less patient with your colleagues or your clients,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe you're less interested in socializing after work.
Yeah.
But over time, it can really erode your relationships or your overall sense of well-being.
And I imagine those feelings of cynicism and detachment can also feed into that reduced performance we were talking about earlier.
Sure.
It's like this downward spiral.
It is a downward spiral, and that's why it's so important to catch these symptoms early on and take steps to address them.
Absolutely.
Now, the next three symptoms are more on the physical side of things,
Okay.
and they can be really easy to overlook or dismiss as just everyday stress.
Okay, well, let's hear them. What should we be paying attention to?
So the fourth symptom is physical complaints.
Okay.
Headaches, stomach aches, muscle tension,
Yeah.
insomnia, all those things that can be triggered or exacerbated by chronic stress.
Right, all those nagging aches and pains that we often just try to push through.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that our bodies are incredibly interconnected.
Right.
And stress can manifest in all sorts of physical ways.
It's like our bodies are trying to send us a message that something's not right.
Exactly. And if we ignore those messages, they just get louder and more insistent.
Okay, what about the fifth symptom?
So the fifth one is changes in your sleep patterns.
Oh, yeah.
You might find yourself having trouble falling asleep, or waking up frequently throughout the night, or even experiencing nightmares.
Yeah, sleep is so crucial, for our physical and mental health.
Absolutely.
So any disruptions there can be a major red flag.
Absolutely. It can become this really vicious cycle. The more stressed you are, the harder it is to sleep, and the less sleep you get, the more stressed you feel.
Totally. And finally, what's that sixth symptom we should be on the lookout for?
The sixth symptom is increased use of substances.
Okay.
And this could be anything from caffeine and alcohol to prescription or even illicit drugs.
So basically anything we might use to numb ourselves out or escape from those feelings of stress and overwhelm.
Exactly. And while those things might provide some temporary relief,
Right.
they ultimately just mask the underlying problem, and they can even make things worse in the long run.
This is a pretty sobering list, to be honest.
Yeah,
But knowledge is power, right?
absolutely.
So now that we know what to look for, let's talk about what we can actually do about it.
Yeah, let's get into solutions.
What does the infographic say about recovering from burnout?
Well, it highlights several key strategies that can help us to build resilience and prevent burnout,
Okay.
both individually and organizationally. And I love how it really focuses on actionable steps rather than just vague advice.
Okay, give us the goods. What are some of those actionable steps we can start taking today?
Okay, well, the first one, and I can't emphasize this enough, is setting boundaries.
Okay.
And I'm not just talking about work-life balance, although that's certainly part of it.
Right.
It's also about setting boundary within our workday, within our relationships, and even within ourselves.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me. What do you mean by setting boundaries with ourselves?
It's about learning to say no with things that drain our energy or don't align with our values. It's about setting realistic expectations for ourselves and not trying to be everything to everyone.
Right.
And it's about prioritizing our own needs, both physical and emotional.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like we're constantly bombarded with these messages telling us to do more,
Yeah,
be more, achieve more.
right.
But if we don't learn to say no, sometimes we'll just end up burning ourselves out.
Exactly. And that leads nicely into the next strategy, which is prioritizing self-care.
Okay.
Now, this isn't just about, bubble baths and face masks, although those can be lovely too.
Right, of course.
It's about consciously choosing activities that nourish our body, mind, and spirit.
So what are some examples of those nourishing activities? I'm always looking for new self-care ideas.
Well, it's really about finding what works for you.
Okay.
It could be spending time in nature, reading a good book, listening to music,
Yeah.
practicing yoga or meditation,
Mhm.
or even just taking a few minutes to sit quietly and breathe deeply.
Yeah.
The key is to find activities that help you to de-stress, recharge, and reconnect with yourself.
I love that it's about making that conscious effort to prioritize our own well-being, even when life gets crazy.
Precisely. And speaking of connection, the infographic also emphasizes the importance of social support.
So reaching out to friends, family, or maybe even a therapist when we're feeling overwhelmed.
Exactly. It's about having people in our lives who we can trust,
Mm.
who we can talk to,
Yeah.
who can offer a listening ear and a shoulder to cry on.
Mm.
Remember, you don't have to go through this alone.
And I imagine having a supportive work environment can make a huge difference as well. Right. A
Absolutely.
workplace where people feel comfortable speaking up and asking for help when they need it.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that organizations really need to prioritize,
Right.
creating that culture of open communication,
Oh,
empathy, and support.
it's all fantastic advice.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what about the work itself?
Yeah.
Is there anything we can do to make it more engaging and fulfilling to prevent burnout from happening in the first place?
That's such a crucial point, and both the infographic and the research paper touch on this idea of engaging in meaningful work.
Okay, tell me more about that. What does it actually mean to engage in meaningful work?
It's about connecting with the why behind what we do.
Okay.
Why are we doing this work?
Mm.
What impact does it have on others? What are we passionate about?
Yeah.
When we can answer those questions,
Yeah.
even the most mundane tasks can feel more purposeful and rewarding.
I love that it's about finding that sense of purpose and connection, even in the day-to-day grind.
Exactly. And for some people, it might even involve making some bigger changes,
That
like
may.
switching careers
Wow.
or starting your own business.
That's a big leap for some people.
Yeah.
But I can see how it would be worth it if it meant finding work that truly aligns with your values and passions.
Absolutely. And even if you know a major career shift isn't feasible right now,
Right.
there are still things that we can do to infuse our current work with more meaning.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, it could be as simple as seeking out new challenges,
Okay.
taking on projects that align with our interests, or finding ways to use our skills to make a positive impact.
Those are great ideas. It's about taking ownership of our work and finding ways to make it more personally fulfilling.
Exactly. And it's also about having open communication with our managers or supervisors about our goals and aspirations.
Mm-hmm.
You never know what opportunities might arise from simply having that conversation.
That's so true. It's about advocating for ourselves and creating a work environment that supports our growth and well-being.
You got it. And, one other strategy that often gets overlooked is delegation.
Oh, delegation.
Mm.
I have to admit, I'm not always the best at that. I tend to want to control everything and do it all myself.
I hear you. It's a common struggle.
Yeah.
But learning to delegate effectively can be a game changer
Yep.
when it comes to preventing burnout.
So how do we delegate effectively?
Yeah.
Any tips?
The key is to be clear about what needs to be done,
Okay.
who's responsible for doing it,
Mhm.
and what the expected outcome is.
Okay.
And it's also about trusting others to do the job well.
That trust piece is huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about letting go of that need to micromanage
Yeah,
and allowing others to step up and shine.
exactly. And, when we delegate effectively, it not only frees up our time and energy,
Right.
but it also creates opportunities for others to learn and grow and develop new skills.
It's a win-win for everyone involved.
It is.
And speaking of wins, let's talk about the ultimate win. Taking time off.
Ah, yes. The holy grail of burnout prevention.
Right.
And yet, it's something that so many of us struggle with.
I know I do. It always feels like there's just too much to do and I can never truly disconnect.
I get it that always-on mentality is so pervasive these days,
Yeah.
but the research is clear.
Okay.
Taking regular breaks, whether it's a long weekend, a staycation,
Mm-hmm.
or a full-blown vacation, is essential for our physical and mental health.
Okay, so we know we need to take breaks,
Right.
but how do we actually make it happen?
Yeah.
Any advice for those of us who struggle to unplug?
Well, the first step is to actually schedule it in your calendar,
Okay.
just like you would any other important meeting or appointment.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and this is the hard part,
Okay.
you have to treat it as non-negotiable.
Easier said than done.
Mm.
What about that nagging feeling that everything will fall apart if we're not there to constantly monitor things?
That's where setting those boundaries comes in again.
Oh.
Let your colleagues know that you'll be unavailable.
Right.
Set up an out-of-office message
Yeah.
and resist the urge to check email or work messages.
Okay, I'm really sensing a theme here. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. It sounds like that's the key to so much of this.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's about protecting our time,
Right.
our energy,
Mm-hmm.
and our sanity. And, it's not just about taking time off work.
Right.
It's also about taking time in our workday to recharge and refocus.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it could be as simple as taking a few minutes to step away from your desk,
Okay.
go for a walk, listen to some music, or even just close your eyes and take a few deep breaths.
Those micro breaks can make a huge difference, can't they?
Absolutely. It's about giving ourselves permission to pause,
Mm-hmm.
reset,
Yeah.
and come back to our work with renewed energy and focus.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here,
We have.
but I want to bring it back to our listeners.
Okay.
Why does all of this really matter?
Mm,
What are the stakes if we don't take burnout seriously?
yeah, that's such a crucial question. And I think it's important to acknowledge that burnout isn't just a personal problem, it's a societal one.
Right.
It impacts our health, our relationships, our productivity, our overall well-being.
So it's not just about feeling tired or stressed.
Mm.
It's about that ripple effect that burnout can have on every aspect of our lives.
Exactly. And the research is really clear.
Okay.
Unaddressed burnout can lead to a whole host of negative consequences,
Yeah.
from increased absenteeism and turnover to decreased job satisfaction
Hmm.
and even physical and mental health problems.
That's a pretty compelling argument for taking this seriously, and I think it highlights just how important it is to prioritize our well-being
Yeah.
and to create work environments that support our mental and emotional health.
Absolutely. And, one of the most striking things I came across in the infographic
Okay.
was the statistic that really drove this point home. It said that 75% of workers have experienced at least some symptoms of burnout.
Wow, 75%. That's a staggering number.
It
It
is.
really shows that this isn't just an issue for a few high-strung individuals.
Right.
This is a widespread problem that's impacting a vast majority of the workforce.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to talk about it openly,
Mm-hmm.
to normalize these experiences, and to equip people with the tools and strategies they need to protect themselves.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about burnout and what we can do to prevent it.
Me too.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question. Knowing all of this, what one small change could you make this week to better safeguard yourself from burnout? Maybe it's setting a firm boundary about checking work emails after dinner. Or
Yeah.
finally, scheduling that yoga class you've been putting off.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's having an honest conversation with your manager about your workload.
I love that. It doesn't have to be this huge overhaul of your entire life.
Right.
Even small incremental changes can make a big difference when it comes to protecting your well-being.
Right?
It's about taking that first step
Yeah.
and then building on it from there.
It's like creating this ripple effect of positive change, right?
Exactly.
One
Yeah.
small action leads to another, and before you know it,
Yeah.
you've created this whole new set of habits and routines that really support your mental and emotional health.
Exactly. And remember, you have the power to create a healthier, more balanced, and more fulfilling life,
Mhm.
both inside and outside of work.
Yeah.
It starts with making that conscious choice to prioritize your well-being.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into burnout. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of not only what causes it, but also how to combat